Today's tutorial is going to show you how to composite two images that were photographed against a white background. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is start out with one of our subjects. In this case, I'm going to start with the flowers that were photographed using a flash setup on a white background. And sometimes with the taller flowers, it's hard to get all the flashes to illuminate the flower consistently. So I'm going to show you two tricks to process your flower photos and maybe even a few other little tips. So here we go. I'm going to select this image, and I'm just working in Adobe Bridge and Adobe Camera Raw right now. But I'm going to open this file. And this is of a larkspur flower that I photographed using a multi-flash setup on a white background, and you can see that it's a little bit dark. So I did this somewhat intentionally because if I overblow it too much, I lose some of the detail on the lighter portions and the stems. So I know I can go into post and pull this up a little bit. I could also use the flashes to have exposed it more properly, but with 4 flashes, it's still sometimes difficult with these taller flowers to get them even. So perhaps using soft boxes or some other thing would work well, but in this case I was using 4 speed lights with no diffusion, and so we're going to just play it up a little bit in Photoshop. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm looking at these really dark components of the flowers, and I need to brighten that up a bit. So I can do that in a couple different ways. I can go to my exposure slider. Now, if you're using Lightroom or some other tool, this will work similarly for you. But I can go to exposure and pull that up a bit, and you'll see that that's lightening everything in that image. There's a point though where we can lighten things too much. So exposure can pull it up to an extent, but we may need to go into these shadows and pull them up more by pulling my slider to the right. And you'll see now how I'm getting detail in those shadows. If you do it too much, it starts to wash out, unless that's the effect that you want. So I'm going to leave it right about here, which looks pretty natural for me for the shadows. And then I also want to make sure that my background is white. So I can pull up the white slider even more. And if I go too far, you start to get some bleed into the picture. It's into the subject itself. So I'm going to pull that back a little bit. But that should help quite a bit. So if I zoom out on that, you'll see what I've done. Now that we've finished the flower portion, I'm going to go ahead and select a bird to use for the next portion of this image. So I'll grab one of my hummingbirds. Let's say this one here, or there's one that's facing me. Let's try that one for starters. I'm going to open this one in Adobe Camera Raw using Bridge as the tool that I was using to find it. Adobe Camera Raw is the tool that I'm initially going to do my first pass work with it. If you're using Lightroom or some other similar tool, your sliders and the concept should apply, although where you find those things might vary a little bit. All right, the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to just slightly pull up the exposure here. When I do so, it just brightens that bird a little bit. I can also play with the shadows and pull that out, but I want to be careful not to do that too much or it whitewashes out the bird. And then I also can pull up the whites in this image, which will make my background even whiter, even though I already shot it on a white background with the board behind the bird and the flashes painting facing towards the board. I still can make that pop a little bit more. All right, so I've started that, and now I'm going to go ahead and click Open Image. And now we have our bird. The next thing I want to do is make a duplicate of this background so that if I mess anything up, I can always go back to the original without having to start over from complete scratch. So I can either click and drag this down to this folded sheet of paper and let go, and that creates a background copy, or I can right-click on a PC and go to Duplicate Layer, and that would do the same. The next thing I want to do, if I'm going to be compositing everything onto a white background, everything needs to be the same shade of white for the background of each of these images so that when we put them all together on one, you don't get a blotchy look. So I can check to see if this is pure white by clicking on this paint palette over here. And once I click on it, this window pops up, and you'll see when I move over to my image, there's an eyedropper. I can click on that eyedropper And you'll notice over here that it will tell me what level of color it is. And FFF is pure white, and anything less than that is something else. You see that those are slightly changing. That means I don't have a pure white space yet. I can go back to my Adobe Bridge, or excuse me, Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom and pull up the whites some more. But there's another trick we can also try. I can go over to my Dodge tool, and you'll notice Dodge, Burn, and Sponge are all located in the same button. You just got to click and hold down to get that window to show up, and then click Dodge. For the range up here at the top, you have options of highlights, midtones, and shadows. I actually just want to touch the highlights, so that will ignore the midtones and shadows when I'm dodging. Dodge means to lighten, burn means to darken. So these are old darkroom terminologies that have kind of rolled over into Photoshop. So I'm already going to lighten the highlights even more. So I'm going to go here and I'll pick an exposure, I don't know, maybe about 5% or so. And then I'm going to go over this. Keep in mind I'm on my top background layer. I'm going to go over this and lighten some of these highlights. And this is additive, so the more I click and do it, the lighter things become. And you can already see where there's a line of demarcation. I'm making a circle around it here, approximately a circle, and you can see where the lighter and darker parts of that white are. So by going over this, I'm just making sure that I'm getting a nice and white background so that when I paste it onto another background, you won't have blotchiness. I mentioned that before. So now if I go to my paint palette and I can click any of these colors, but once I click on it, you'll get the eyedropper. I can then take the eyedropper and see what color I'm getting. And I'm getting pretty close to pure white. So I'm going to take that highlight, the Dodge tool again, and just go over this one more time and get that as close to white as I can. So now if I click on it, I'm pretty close. I've got FFF in a lot of spaces. I'm just missing a little bit of it up here. Okay, so that's the first thing that we can do with the bird. The next thing that we can do is work on these other colors. So I can go into my sponge tool, and again I'm selecting that by clicking this little dot in the right lower corner, and it gives me these three choices. Sponge allows me to desaturate or saturate. And I usually only pick a flow of up to about 5% because saturate a little goes a long way. So I can click in my image, and then I can use my bracket keys to make the saturation brush wider or narrower. And then I also want to go here to my brush, and I want to choose a hardness of 0. That way I won't have lines of demarcation. It'll all just feather together, so the edges of my brush are very soft. And then I can go in, and I'm still on my top background layer, and I can go in and selectively hit the saturation to just touch the colors that I want. This is especially nice if you have a colored background and you don't want to saturate the whole thing. You just want to get some of it saturated. Okay, so there's that. So I've done that. And then I like to actually save this so that we know what we have, and in case something happens, we can still work on it. So I'll call this folder Composite. And I'll save that file as a .psd or Photoshop file. And then I'm going to go back to Adobe Bridge, and I'm going to find one more picture. Maybe I need a female this time. So let's find a good female here in the mix. Lots of fun photos here. That's a young male. This looks like a good winner. So I will pick this one. We'll open that, and I'll do the same thing. So I want to make sure that my background is white, so I can pop my exposure a little if I need to. But I'll pull those whites up. That will help whiten up that background. I can also pull up shadows if I feel I need to make this part of the image pop. And then I'm going to open it. And then I'll duplicate my background by clicking and dragging down to that folded piece of paper, or I can right click and choose the duplicate layer option. And next I'm going to check for my white background by clicking on the paint palette and then clicking in near the bird to see what color of white I have. These are pretty darn close to white. Pure white would be in the far upper left corner, but I'm close. So, okay, I'm going to do that. And then remember, if we need to lighten it some more, I can go to Dodge. And again, there's a few ways you can go about this. I'm trying to do a quick way for you, but I can go in and dodge those highlights even further. You'll notice though that as I'm dodging the highlights, if I hit the bird at all, it lightens the bird as well. Now we can deal with that later, but I'm pointing it out for you because it does touch the lightest parts of the bird. So now if I check again with my paint palette and click on my dropper, I'm getting pretty close to pure white here. Not 100% that yet though. So I can go in and play with that a little bit more. And you may say, well, Lisa, you're lightening up the wings and things too. I am. And we can fix that later if we need to. But for now, I'm going to leave that there. So now I have my larkspur. I have one hummingbird and the other hummingbird that we're going to put together. Now you'll notice with this hummingbird, if I turn off this top layer by clicking on the eyeball, you'll see the before and then you'll see the after. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you a little bit about masking. So I mentioned earlier that if you brighten the bird too much, there are ways that we can deal with that. I want to explain briefly the process of masking in layers. So now that we have this bird on the layers that we have over here on the right, I can do something called masking. So if you think of masking tape when you're painting a wall, if you put masking tape on the wall and paint over it, when you peel the masking tape off, it reveals underneath. This is going to be similar type of concept here with the masking. So we're going to take this top layer and we're going to peel parts of it off to reveal the layer underneath. Now if I turn off this layer for a moment, you'll see the underneath part of the bird is much darker, looks a little more natural. This one looks really, really bright. We did a treatment to the top layer, but the underneath layer is untouched. So how do we reveal pieces of that underneath layer? Well, we peel off the masking tape. So first of all, I'll leave this layer back on. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my screen and there's a little rectangle with a hole in the middle of it, and that is our masking tool. I select the top layer, I click on this masking tool, and it creates this rectangle here. This will show me what I will have masked. In other words, what I'm going to peel the masking tape off. You'll see the evidence of that here, and you'll also see it here. So let's go in and take a look. So in masking, if we're going to peel the masking tape off, so to speak, black reveals and white paints it back on. So this is a very forgiving way to kind of play with your image. If you were to just use the eraser tool and erase part of your top layer, you can't go back and change something later because that's gone. Masking is much more forgiving and a lot easier to use. So what I need is 100% white. So I'm going to go and click on this layer. I'm going to go and drag this all the way up to 100% white, or I can type FFF up here and that will give me 100% white. And then for the other one, I need 100% black. So I can go and pull that all the way down and do 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and that will give me 100% black. All right, now that I have those two colors, I can go in and mask, but I need to do so with my brush. So I'm going to go to my brush tool, and up here at the top, I can choose my hardness to be very hard, which means hard edges on that brush, or very soft. I'm going to pick very soft edges, so my hardness is at 0. And then I can use my bracket keys once I click on this bird to make my brush bigger. So I'll hit right bracket or left bracket. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. And my opacity, I'm going to change maybe down to, I don't know, 30-40%, somewhere in here. That way when I click and drag, it's additive. So I'm not removing 100% of that layer, though I could, but I can kind of play with it a little bit. And so I'm going to bring back some of that initial color that I lightened too much in that bird, especially in those wings. And I can change the size of my brush. And if I make a mistake by going outside of the lines too much, I can go and click my X key to toggle back and forth, or I can click these arrows back and forth and it will bring the white up to the top. White restores and black reveals. So white, if I'm doing this with a white brush, you'll see that white is building back in that top layer. Black removes that top layer. So again, black removes the top layer, which was the brighter layer, and shows the underneath layer. And white paints back over it again with the original top layer. So you can kind of play with this and play with your opacity to get just the look that you want. So it's totally up to you what you like. So I will use black here because this is pretty bright. I want to reveal some of this underlying layer because that's a little too harsh. But if you did too much, and every time you re-click and paint here, it removes even more of that top layer. So every time you click, it gets darker. But if I did too much, I can click my X key or these arrows and I can brighten it back up again. I can play with my opacity up here until you get just the right look that you want. So that's totally up to you how you want to do that. But I'll bring this down just a little bit more. All right, so if you want to see the difference, I'll turn this layer off. There's the underneath layer. There's the one that I've masked some of that lighter layer away to reveal some of the underlying layer. Think of it like two pieces of glass, and you've painted over both pieces of glass, one being, let's say pink on the bottom and one being blue on the top. Well, if you remove some of the blue, the pink underneath will show up. So it's literally like playing with layers of glass in here, and you're just removing some of those layers. Again, it's called masking because it's a lot like masking tape. Okay, so now that I have that masking done, I can go ahead and, save that image or do whatever else I need to do with it. If you do take this bird and you want to select it to add it to something else, these two layers are separate now and you'll need to go ahead and merge those layers. So I can hit my control key and I can select. So if I hold down my control and I click on each of these layers, they're both selected. I can go up here to layer, merge visible, or flatten image, or merge layers. Merge layers will only merge the layers you've selected. Merge visible will merge all visible layers, which I only have 2 at the moment, but if there were more, it would merge all of them. Or flatten image flattens the whole entire thing. I'm just going to click merge layers here, and now this is one single layer that you could then go and select and go paste elsewhere into your composite. All right, that's a basic on masking.